Good morning, I'm Gareth. I'm a vehicle technician looking at your Audi A3 today with a fault symptom of alarm randomly sounding with no pattern and a degree of intermittency. I've carried out an initial troubleshooting scan using the Volkswagen Audi Group manufacturer tool, and the 4 faults stored of interest are for the interior monitoring sensor, the vehicle inclination sensor and the alarm horn, all reporting no signal or communication intermittently. And then finally the vehicle inclination sensor showing as faulty, intermittent. So my next task is to understand the relationship between these components and how they work on a layer on a network. For your benefit, this is the convenience ECU, which is where the faults are stored, which controls a lot of different functions across central lock-in, alarm, electric windows, etc, etc. The 3 components in question have a common denominator, which is the alarm siren, the interior monitoring sensor and then the vehicle inclination sensor. They all share the same ground circuit, which is this one and this one. They all share the same power supply, which is this one, which goes to a different illustration. So their power comes in, unit, power comes in, unit, power comes in to the unit. And they also share the same network communication, which is this LIN bus, which is this wire here. Now, the LIN bus is the way the control unit communicates with sensors and controller outputs. Telegrams are broadcast on this wire, which then splits off and goes to the subdivisions of the units. And if you get a problem on the LIN bus network, either through a broken wire or a faulty control unit, that can have an effect. So we needed to check basically powers, grounds and LIN across all these 3, because they're all shared and they're all reporting that at one point they couldn't talk on the network, which could be caused by a bad power, a bad ground or a messaging problem, but very rare for all 3 to be taken out at the same time unless there's a problem at the main source of power, ground or LIN. I've started my investigation in the front of the car at the fuse board, which that orange 5 amp fuse is the power supply to those control units, which is confirmed and verified as good. I then looked at the location of the 3 components in question. Now, the vehicle inclination sensor is very difficult to access. It's right up behind the dashboard above the pedal box. The interior monitoring sensors are a bit easier to access. So as you can see with my black and red backpinning probes, I've confirmed on that control unit that there is power and ground to the unit, but the LIN bus message is corrupt. Now, the reason for the LIN bus message corrupt is currently unknown, so I've then had to carry out extra tests. Now, the first test was my LIN bus message did not come back when I disconnected that control unit, which indicates that the LIN problem is not with that control unit. As we can see by looking at something called measure value blocks are data PIDs of information that allow the technician or whoever's driving the laptop to look at various different component statuses. Now, what's interesting here is we've got interior monitoring, sensor status, no communication, alarm detected, no communication, tilt sensor, which is the inclination sensor above the pedals, no communication, and also the sounder status. Control module does not, and there's a bit of text missing, but it basically says control module does not respond. Same for the interior monitoring. So with that being the case, what that tells me is the car is currently in a faulted state of where that LIN bus network is compromised and is not talking. So my next test is a bit more involving, which is locate the alarm siren, which on your model is mounted under the driver's side wheel arch. Got to remove the wheel, the arch liner. There's an anti-theft tamper-proof bolt that we have to cut a notch in to be able to undo. It's a shear bolt because this siren lives in a protective shielded box up under the arch for security purposes, so it can't be tampered with. With my test leads here, I've set up a very basic but quick and effective test, which looks at the 3 wires. So the red and green trace, which is the unit power, the brown, which is the ground, and the purple or the lilac, which is my LIN bus. And when I look at these pieces of data on a screen, so I can see my green trace, which is my power, is just under 14 volts. It's under 14 volts, by the way, because the ignition's on, but I've got a battery support unit putting charge back into the battery for the purpose of testing. And this yellow event you can see on the screen here is my LIN bus. Now my suspect at the moment would naturally be the inclination sensor, because that's already been reported by the control unit as faulty. However, product experience dictates that these units, the siren unit, they are troublesome. They have been superseded, and in terms of following on from my interior monitoring sensors, where I disconnected it and I carried out the same test looking at whether this Limbus activity and my measure value blocks on the laptop changed, and they didn't, I need to do the second test now to this component, which is the next easiest to get to. And obviously if this didn't yield a result, I'd then be looking at partial dash strip down to be able to get to the inclination sensor. Now, when I disconnect the plug on this control unit, so my siren's off, my plug connection is still connected with my test leads, but I've no longer got the siren on the system. Look at the change we have on the screen. So the 14 volts obviously remains. For reference, I'm using the ground of the circuit rather than a known good, because I want to verify that this system is correct and working at this plug, rather than just it can show voltage on a positive by using another ground. But my Limbus activity has woken back up. These are now packets of data that are being transferred on that network. And what's interesting, if I then look at my measure value blocks, we've now got a major observed change. So we've got inactive, but we haven't got any communication issues. We've still got control module doesn't respond for the sounder because that's disconnected. And what I'm now going to do briefly is set up a tester where I show the car in a locked and ready state. So I've now locked the car, rolled the catches, simulating it being locked up and left alone. And I've also observed a better change again. So what I've got is interior monitoring sensor status activated with no alarm detected, and I've got tilt sensor status activated with no alarm detected. So I'm confident at this point that what we're seeing, now that we've been able to restore Limbus communication with the problematic siren out of the equation, and we've now got correct activity being displayed by the rest of the control units on that messaging network as part of the anti-theft system, that our siren is our problem. And what I would expect to see now is if we plug the siren back in, the Limbus network would fall down again, and these components would then go non-communication. As a result of this leads to inaccurate anti-theft monitoring and basically an alarm siren, because it's in a faulted state, going off randomly without any predictability, and obviously being a bit of a discomfort to you and any neighbours. So that concludes the assessment on the fault. A little bit trickier than some to get to a conclusion on, but I'm confident that we are at a point where we can safely say replacing the siren unit on this car will resolve the issues. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video today. I hope you found it useful and informative, and thanks again for choosing Euro Performance.